Welcome to Syntax. Thanks for tuning in. Today we got a potluck for you today, which is you bring the questions, we bring the answers. Please keep submitting your questions. Go to syntax.fm. There's a button that says Ask a Potluck Question. Click it and throw your question in the Google form, which I'm laughing about because our first question is, why do we use a Google form? Got all kinds of interesting questions today for you about over-engineering, JavaScript, generative AI, workspaces, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get on into it. My name is Wes. I'm a developer from Canada. With me, as always, is Mr. Scott Talinsky. How you doing today, Scott?
Hey, I'm doing good. Feeling great. Ready to get into it.
Right on. Let's talk real quick about Sentry at Sentry.io. This podcast is brought to you by Sentry. The tagline is code breaks, fix it faster. That's what Sentry is, the tool for figuring out why your code is broken or slow or who's using it on what browser as to what went wrong. It just gives you all the information as to when something goes wrong, how to fix it in all the little bits and pieces. Yesterday, Scott and I had one ourselves, right? We deployed a new feature. Scott did a whole bunch of work on what was the feature? It was resuming a podcast episode, right?
Yeah. So it also the podcast player on the site will now resume any episode where you last left off. So if you come back, if you were listening to episode 791, you got halfway through and then come back to the site later, it will put you at the exact same spot of episode 791. Also, by default, the podcast player is now open by default from the start, and it has the first episode queued up already. And there's a neat little CD animation that comes in.
I love the CD animation. It feels so good. Just go to syntax.fm and play an episode because it's like, woo.
Yeah, play a different episode. And by the way, Wes, we learned from CodeCov, which is a Sentry company, actually. We learned from CodeCov that my CD player that I had before was too massive of an SVG, and it was taking up a lot of loading space. So we learned that through CodeCov in our CI/CD, and then I replaced that whole SVG with an emoji of a CD. So now it just uses the emoji. It's great.
They often tell you don't inline your SVGs, and that's why, because it was
totally.
like 100K of SVG.
It was a big old SVG,
being loaded on the homepage for an Easter egg. Worth it. But like as soon as CodeCov flipped on a new feature for Svelte Kit the other day where it'll break out the back end and the front end code. And as soon as they did that, I was like, that seems large. And I did a quick look into it, and I was like, oh, why is this Easter egg like 120K or something like that?
What's funny, Wes, sorry, even to sidebar.
All right, let's keep
it's related.
Sidebarring.
I had noticed that was super large at one point, and I took that code out of the code base. And then at some point I was like, why did I take my Easter egg out? And then brought it back in without even thinking. I should have left a comment. That would have been a perfect place to have a comment saying, hey, I took this out. It was giant.
There you go. But anyways, I was trying to come back to the Sentry read here was we deployed that sucker. Scott tested the crap out of it. I reviewed it. I tested it. I'm pretty sure CJ went through it as well. Everything worked. Bing, bong, boom. And then, I don't know, half an hour after launching, bloop, 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 inbox starts popping up. We're getting all these Sentry things. We missed something. I don't know. Did you end up figuring out what it was? It was like not a number was a number.
Yeah, so there's two places in which a method is called to set the time of the player. One of which is when it initially loads, and the other of which is when it's being clicked from a timestamp. Now, everything is pretty firmly typed, so there must be a cast somewhere that is like misrepresenting what the type actually is, because TypeScript should have caught that, right? But it didn't. So no, I haven't found out exactly. It's either when you click on a transcript to change the time, or when you click on the timestamp within the show notes to change the time. It's one of those two.
Oh, it's probably.
I'll look at it after we record.
I think what's happening, and TypeScript wouldn't have caught this, is when you are parsing that timestamp either from local storage or from a URL click, like a hash, when you parse float or whatever, if it's not a number, parse float gives you NaN. and type of, not a number, is, thank you JavaScript, a number, right? So
yes.
I've had that exact error before where you're trying to set a number, which is but not a finite number, meaning that like there's a couple numbers in JavaScript that are non-finite. Which can you name them all? Maybe we'll do a little stumps here. Infinity.
Is it infinity? Not a number. How many are there?
I don't know. Let me look them up. There's only 3. You got 2 of them.
Infinity, not a number. Oh gosh,
You're not going to get this one. It's negative infinity.
Come on.
Which sounds like you're talking to my kids.
I know. No, I was going to say the same thing.
What's the lowest number in the world? Negative infinity.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Let's get into the first question from Jonathan Land here. I only asked this out of deep curiosity, which is a very nice way to call us out on this. Why do you use Google Forms for Potluck questions? I'd guess it would be the easiest thing on the site to build yourselves. Is it just a matter of being, we'll never get to this zone at the bottom of the Kanban, or does Google Drive workflow useful for something else that would be hard to replicate? That's a fantastic question, because Google Forms for text sucks. It's good for input, but it goes into a spreadsheet, and like trying to read long forms of a spreadsheet is really frustrating. So why do we do it? That's like a failure of engineering is defaulting to a Google form, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the reason why we did it in the first place is the site never had a database. So the initial site didn't have a database. So we weren't going to bring a database in just for the forms. So it was like, we'll just throw a form up and call it a day, right? But that was, many a year ago, and now we have a database. I wonder if a next-gen version of the Potluck question could be like questions are even maybe public and voted on by users.
Yes.
Yeah. We could build that in no time. We could build that on stream.
Because we should build that, because our process right now is Scott and I go through it. We have a column that's called coming, and then we type that and it changes the color of the row.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't it be nice to be able to to search them, filter them, tag them, reorder them? There's so many cool things we could do.
You could use AI to tag them as well.
Yeah.
So that way we could say, give me a Svelte question, give me a React question.
We should do that on stream. I think that would be pretty fun.
That'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, but that's the reason why. Basically, it didn't have a database. Now we have a database. Now there's no excuse. Now we should just build this. That'd be easy. All right, Raffle. Hey, gang. What is over-engineering, and how might I avoid this? As a novice programmer, abstractions are attractive, but I always notice that occasionally they backfire. I'm wondering how, besides experience, might I start learning how to avoid over-engineering my solutions? I work mostly in SvelteKit, but recently been looking at Astro, and it made me wonder. Niche example, if you find it helpful, since 2020, I spent a long time learning web dev, web design, and branding. I want to build a business. During my planning stages, I realized I could build something similar to a low or no code solution via the application of SvelteKit and Storyblock. In Storyblock, I can select a block section, which then has layout options. So ultimately, I ended up creating a sort of web flow that I could completely control with my own code. Is this over-engineering? I found the solution to be kind of cool, and during a project, I could go into the code and change some assumptions, parameters, and essentially remains customizable. Okay, so is this over-engineering? Sure. But did you get something out of it at the end? It sounds like it. You got the experience of building something like that, and it was seemed like it was a neat experience for you. So is it over-engineering? Sure, but is it a problem? I don't know.
Yeah, I for me, I think.
But, sorry,
go ahead.
The last point of that is, did you ship in time? If you shipped in time, all's well that ends well, right?
To me, over-engineering is all about adding unnecessary complexity, because the complexity in an application is fine when it is good, when you want to make things reusable, when you want to make things like speed up dev time, right? But when you add unnecessary complexity, it may seem like something is better, but it can be harder to implement, harder to maintain, harder to deploy. All of a sudden you're like, now we have this thing to sort of deal with whenever we want to edit it. And now I have to like deploy this in a funny way, or I'm not totally sure how it works. It often comes at a level where abstractions are too tricky for other people to implement. And we've all worked on code bases like that. We're like, what the hell was this guy thinking when they built this type of thing, right? And like I just came up with some things I've said where you could say this would be over engineering. Is I can't call this function from this part of the application. You know, like sometimes you are in an app, you're like, why is it built in this odd way? And sometimes it's just simply because it would be too complex to be able to surface that data or that functionality somewhere else in the application. Or another one is I just want to add a class, or I just want to add a border to this thing. And the system that they have in place for this is not good. Now, on the flip side, if you were just to willy-nilly have no over engineering in it, right? If you made it not over engineered at all, then it would be hard to maintain and it would just be sort of a mess. And then we all know messy code bases sort of just eke and creak and break over time. The other thing for me is like, I can't figure out what the equivalent of X, Y, and Z is in this implementation, right? So we've talked about this in the past where like you have a component system and instead of adding like a border 1 pixel solid red, you have to figure out what their equivalent is in the design system to add a border. And the benefit to that is that you have a strict way of doing things and nobody deviates from that. But the downside is like, now I have to learn your own way. So there is a sweet spot. I know that you said, how do I figure it out without experience? But experience really is something that you learn over time with this is over engineering. My rule of thumb is I err on the side of keeping things together and not over engineering, but making it so that if you did want to abstract it in the future, I'm always thinking, I'm not going to do this now, but at some point I might want to use this for X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to write it in such a way where I could break this up into multiple pieces.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And Wes, my brain's been on this a lot lately. I'm listening to fundamentals of software architecture right now. And it's like it's really changing the way I think about how I design things. Because many of the ways I design, the way my systems work is based off of entirely my own experience and what works and what doesn't and what I've seen. But it's not based in any sort of firm software principles. And so I'm learning a lot about the things that I do and why I do them the way that I do them and why that's successful. And I think it's an interesting book that maybe you might be interested in, dear listener. But other than that, I do think it's a feel thing. Complexity can come from all sorts of ways. Over engineering can come from all sorts of things, whether it's using specific libraries and frameworks when you don't use them. Granted, we all have our tools. Those tools work really well. But like, are those tools always appropriate for everything? Depends on what you're making. And you gotta kind of look at things. I think we can all get a little bit into a mode where we're like, I'm going to build it this way because that's the way I build everything. And next thing you know, you're putting Redux on a blog when you don't need that. That's over-engineered, right? So we have to be cognizant of the tech we're using and why we're using it, and just keep that in mind.
Next question from Askin View. I appreciate bringing some love to Vue. I am a convert from React. Speaking of framework wars, what are your guys' thoughts on Webview-based mobile apps? Or are native components king? I think, so what they're talking about here is that when you're in a native application and you tap on something, sometimes you can tell that they're quickly, like the screen goes blank for a second and they're loading a web view. Yeah.
That's not what they're talking about.
Oh, what are they talking about?
Well, they're talking about like an app that's built with a web view, like Electron, but like for mobile.
Yeah, but I'm talking about native apps often will have part of their application as a web view, and you can see it because like the Twitter app, for example. If you click on, like, I think if you manage your profile or there is some stats, if you click on that, it'll go blank for a second and then it'll load it up. Is that what you're thinking of, or are you thinking they're just talking about like building an entire
I think
PWA?
They're talking about building an entire app, but not even necessarily a PWA. Like Missive is an app shipped with whatever Cordova, the modern Cordova equivalent is.
Yeah.
And that's just a straight up web view. So like apps that are built as a web view is 100%. Really just, it's loading up a browser and loading up everything using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript instead of native components, compared to React Native, which is actually translating it into real native code. I think the better I get at front end stuff, the more I realize that Webview apps are actually possible to do really, really super well. I know we both use Missive for a long time. Missive is built with web tech. It's fantastic. I started using an app that I'm going to sick pick today, which is tweak.so. That's built with web tech. It's built local first. And when you use the native app, it feels you cannot tell. When you use the desktop app, it feels like a native app. So when you feel the actual native app, it feels like a native app as well. So I think there are some things that make them possible to do really well. And in the same regard, I think so many of them are done poorly that people equate Webview apps with kind of like laziness or not being done well. I think the only way you're going to get to a true write once, deploy everywhere situation is using the Webview way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I think it can be done well. I think most people don't do them well, which is, part of the problem. So how can you do a Webview well? Local data storage, not going off to the web for everything, because then it's going to load like a native app loads. Making sure that you're following design guidelines for iOS or Android, right? Design is always a big one. The design on Webview apps can tend to be all over the place. So making sure that you're hitting actual design patterns and design guidelines for good mobile apps. And then 3, like measuring for performance and speed. Your animations need to make sense. They need to be tidy. They need to work well. Those types of things are what's going to make your Webview app actually really good. Because native components, all that stuff is great. Those apps can function very well. React Native apps are great, but you'll find it is kind of a ball of complexity sometimes. So
I think to make it work really well for most developers, unless you're like Missive and you have obviously they have extremely good developers to be able to fool us into that we were both surprised that it was a web app. You have to use a component library that has interaction built in. People are expecting to be able to swipe back. People are expecting to be able to swipe around, and swipes is not it's not an event in JavaScript, right? We have pointer events, but there is no swipe or double tap or things like that. So I think if you are doing that, you have to reach for a component library that is built for mobile that will feel good. Otherwise, it's just gonna, like Scott says, kind of feels a bit crappy. Unless you're an amazing developer that you can re-implement all that.
Yes, absolutely. You need to make it feel like a native app. I'm working on this with my breakdancing app right now. Last night, I implemented local data storage so that way it loads instantaneously on native devices. And same thing, Wes. Every single time I have a drawer, it needs to be swipeable to dismiss. I have little swipers. They need to feel as good as it does when I was using like Apollo on iOS. So those types of things are things you need to be cognizant of to make a good Webview-based app. All right, next question from CJ. Do you have any recommendations for running or managing monorepos? I've had mixed results with things like Nix and NPM workspaces and the like, so I'm wondering if there's an easy way to use with decent documentation. Yeah, CJ, I think the easiest way that I found to have a nice working monorepo is with PNPM workspaces, because they're more flexible and more simple than NPM workspaces. So you essentially just have a workspace file that points to all of the different repos in your workspace. You reference them. It works really well. And I haven't had too many issues. Every single time I go to do a monorepo, I reach for PNPM workspaces. That said, I know a lot of people have a lot of success using Turbo Repo with anything, considering it handles caching and makes the hard things with a monorepo a little bit easier. I tend to stay on the side of less complexity and less tools, and typically just reach for PNPM workspaces, and that's it. Because I do find that once, especially with monorepos, once you get into the tooling for it beyond your package manager, it all feels like it's a bigger project at that point.
It's a bit. That's a prime example of over-engineering to me, where
Totally.
Unless you're like at the scale of like Facebook, it's probably not worth making it more complex, because then you're going to get this like, I can't even get this thing to run. The new devs on, all right, just clone this thing, and did you install this 47 local things, and you can't even npm start the thing, and it's so frustrating. So I like to err on the side of standard, and then sprinkle on if needed. So my personal course platform it's NPM workspaces, but I use PNPM to run them because, like Scott says, it's the best. Like, I'm just going to say use PNPM. I use like the workspaces in the package.json file, and then I have added turbo repo on top of it for faster builds. And what that does is it gives me, basically, I can like take it out if I don't want it, and I can still run the thing with PNPM. But when I deploy the thing, I used to be like, if it's totally from scratch, it takes like, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes to build. But then when I have turbo repo, it's sometimes I can deploy in 30 seconds or so. So that might be worth adding on top once you've got your monorepo sort of in place.
Yeah, you don't need the extras until you want the extras. So start with most simple and then work.
So frustrating otherwise, yeah.
Yeah. You just add on a bunch of stuff. You're adding config file after config file just to make it work.
Yeah. Question from Algorithm. What does energy consumption of generative AI, particularly large language model, compare to serving static web content? With a web server, we can serve cached responses for identical requests, meaning the server does not need to generate a new page every single visit, right? That makes sense. Somebody goes to syntax.fm/796, and then the next person that visits that web page, we don't need to regenerate that. We don't need to do a database call or to loop over all of the show notes or anything. That it's all been generated already, and we simply just need to serve up the cache version of that. Given that AI responses typically cannot be cached due to context and other variables, does this mean even simple queries like what is 1 + 1 require significant computational resources each time they're processed? Are there any tactics being developed to reduce the energy for generative AI? I guess bringing context and processing closer is one way, but I would love to understand more about the subject. Yeah, this is kind of interesting. So I think there's a couple things here. First of all, the big energy usage in AI is training the models. Not to say that using them doesn't use energy. I'll talk about that in a second, but actually consuming and training, that's where you need a supercomputer, right? We saw Tesla is installing 3 fans the size of a freaking football field, which they're going to put on top of all of their NVIDIA GPUs while they're training like the self-driving. Like, that is wild to me that you have to get a freaking jet engine to cool these things because like that's how much energy they're actually using, right? So that's the high consumption. And I'm curious, like, you do that once and then you release the model, and now the model has been trained on all of that data. Then actually using the model, that certainly still does use quite a bit. I did a little bit of a deep dive into this, and I'll put some links in the show notes about how much energy they actually use. And of course, it depends on CPU and where it's actually running. So I wouldn't sweat it that much. And I don't know that you can sort of compare it to like a static website, because you should really be comparing it to like a web application where you do have to have a new database call, a new generation, you have a server running that runs your application, every single request on there, because they are unique. Other things I want to say is that AI models actually are very deterministic, because we had the guy on from OpenAI, and I asked him, I was like, hey, like, how do you make AI models give us the same thing every single time? And he's like, that's actually how they're built. AI models it's just math at the end of the day, and they are incredibly deterministic, meaning that you give it the same thing. They are pure functions by default, meaning that you give it what is 1 + 1, and it will always return the same thing to you. The fact that it doesn't do that is because we don't want it to do that. We want it to be a little bit more random, and that's where you give it things like temperature and seed values and whatnot, so that it will give you a bit of a random value every single time that it comes back. What else can be done? I think, like you said, bringing the models closer to you will certainly help as well. But I think the big thing is that the models will be able to run on device. As these models get smaller and more purpose-built for their actual use case, they require a lot less energy to actually run, and they're much faster. We've seen it. You can run a lot of these models right in your browser. and they're not using very much energy at all. And if we learn anything from talking to the folks from AWS is that if somebody can make something faster and cheaper, they will. Because if somebody has a $10 million AI bill and they can cut that down to $5 million because the whatever they've done for the energy consumption and still get the same quality, they're going to figure that out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's all dead on. All right, next question here from Path 6 Designs. Help, I'm a new developer and I've taken the time to research technologies, especially frameworks. I was unfortunately, in my opinion, taught CodeIgniter 3 in school and have since tried out Flask and SvelteKit, both of which I love for different reasons. However, I still want to try Vue and Django. However, as I researched, I have always had a question that the internet does not answer well. Well, it does answer it with just about every possible differing opinion shouted out loudly and often with profanity-laced proclamations. This is so true. Why do I need frameworks? What is wrong with creating a website with vanilla everything? HTML, CSS, and yes, vanilla JavaScript. What does a framework do that makes it better? What does a static page generator do better? I've seen many answers. I've seen many different answers. And a blog post I read today made me want to get your opinion. And a link to a rant about front-end web development, a blog post. So here's my answer here. Do you need all this stuff? I don't know. For a basic blog, maybe not even a blog, right? For a basic website, just a basic brochure site, 5 pages, no dynamic content whatsoever. You don't need a framework or anything like that. You can set up caching. You can set your HTML pages. Those pages will load extremely fast if they're just straight up HTML, CSS. The thing is most of us just aren't building those type of static brochure sites anymore. Those things are often being left into the CMS world, like WordPress, where they can have a dynamic backend. Anybody can update that. Or maybe they're being done in, Wix or Squarespace or one of those, right? So that type of brochure site doesn't really need to be done with JavaScript frameworks. The thing that JavaScript frameworks really do well, and frameworks in general, is they hold on to context really well. So you change page and you have some data that's already been loaded once. You don't need to make another trip to load some more data. That data could just be available, whether that's like user account information or let's take the Syntax website. We have the audio player available at all times. You couldn't have an audio player that stayed on screen while you changed pages without a JavaScript framework. Why? Because what the framework is doing is it's swapping out the content on the page instead of loading an entirely new HTML document. So if you need things that are persistent, like an audio player or something like that, you need a framework. At least right now you do. Animations. Those are coming with the Vue page transitions for multi-page applications. So that's going to be a thing that will actually shorten the burden here needed. But oftentimes what people are building with frameworks is not these brochure sites. They're building applications that do things, that react to user input, change data live on the screen. You could use vanilla JavaScript for these things. It's just going to be more time consuming. And oftentimes you might run into performance issues because you're not doing things optimally. And it's a reason why all the JavaScript frameworks kind of differ in their approach, right? HTMX is just swapping out HTML with the UI. And that's actually a really interesting approach because it is kind of feeling like the type of thing you would do with vanilla JavaScript. You're taking a section, you're swapping it out with new information when you click on things. Other ones take more control. React takes a lot of control, so much so that the control goes out of the DOM, where other ones use the DOM. So in reality, we're building things that are more dynamic, more expressive than a static page with static data. For a static page, static data, you don't need a JavaScript framework even today. But the end result is most of us aren't building those things professionally.
Yeah, I did a quick scan of this blog post here, and I understand. I think the whole idea behind this blog post is that things are getting way too complex, and the old ways that we used to do it were much better, and this is my website. But these rants of this is my personal website is, like Scott says, it's not the type of stuff we're building, right? This guy's saying, like, I built this with handlebars and it's a simple website. Like, yeah, if you're just building a content-based site, that's probably a good solution. And a lot of people like to over engineer. We're coming back to over engineering
Yes.
every single one of these questions. But there's a reason why we use a lot of these frameworks, and it's because we are building things that are more complex. And if you choose to not use a framework, you will find yourself building your own framework, or at least a whole bunch of libraries and helper functions around that type of thing, right? So that's why we need frameworks. And often people want to use a framework because they just want to be told how to do something and how things work, and they want to do it in a single way rather than have to approach it in a really frustrating way. If you were building an app that is like, maybe once we get signals, this will change a little bit, but if you're building an app like Scott said, with all the updating data and live and clicking and changing, that would be quite a bit of vanilla JavaScript to do on your own. And this is coming from me. I'm Mr. Vanilla JavaScript, right? I love it. But I don't think that I would build any sort of complex application, let alone maybe not even my own blog, without a bunch of it. Yeah, there is really frustrating things. The node modules is really frustrating. There's a lot to it. But like, again, this blog post keeps going into like, jQuery is perfect, we can keep using it. Like we have much better primitives in the browser. And whenever I read this type of stuff, I often think like, are you just frustrated that things have changed so much and you want to just go back to what you've known? Because we see a lot of that with developers where this is what I know and I don't want anything else to change. I want to keep doing this for the rest of my life. And I agree with that a lot, right? I want stuff to stop changing so I can keep building my stuff. I want to focus on the actual product and not just continually be churning out. And JavaScript has a lot of that. But there's also a flip side of, there's a reason why we're building these types of things, because we need it. And we're not just mashing jQuery into a whole bunch of random pages to make things work.
Yeah, that is truly it. I think that's one of I know we've had this discussion a few times on this podcast before, but I think that the hard part with discussions in web development in general and online spaces is that people often talk about complexity and too much this, too much that. Why are you using this? Why are you using that? But they aren't talking about what they're building and how those things are different. Because we're all building things that are very different. The types of technology you need for building a email client is going to be very different than the types of tools you need for building an error and exception handling service like Sentry, or the types of tools that you're going to need for building a blog or a personal website, or literally anything. So we often talk about, and fight for our tools because they work well for us, but we don't often consider maybe somebody's building something totally different than what I'm building. And they have different needs, different tools for different needs. Imagine that.
Next question we have is from Thomas. I'm wondering how you guys handle ad blockers blocking Sentry. And I'll expand this to ad blockers blocking things that you find useful in your application. I'm running internal tests for an app right now, and I see a lot of issues just don't show up. I'm guessing it's because of ad blockers. So this is the case with a lot of analytics. This is the case with, obviously, Sentry. This is the case with a lot of third-party things that get into your application, is that ad blockers will block them. And that is, unfortunately, the case with a lot of these things, because that's people choose to turn on the list and they want to block it. Even if you think, no, this is good. I want to know information about what's going on. So what can you do? Well, the way that you get around all of this is, and we did this both with our Sentry and with our analytics. What do we use for the analytics again?
Plausible
is you have to set up what's called a proxy. And almost every single one of these third-party solutions will allow you to proxy the data to them. So what you do is, instead of sending the data straight to their endpoint, which will often be blocked by ad blockers, is you send the data to your own endpoint, and then you sort of hot potato it on to the third-party service. So if you go to the Syntax website, and I'll link up the two files that we use for this. One of them is called 57475, which is CJ came up with that. The reason he named it that is because I believe that's stats and 3v3n7. What's that?
I don't know.
And
CJ,
that's leak code.
yeah, CJ's
Hold
the
on.
man for stuff like that.
Hold on. We got to reverse this. I knew it at the time.
B? No, I don't know. I'm not good at leak code. I never.
No, EVEN events.
Oh,
Okay.
CJ.
So
nice.
CJ has what did I say the 5 was?
S? No, I don't know.
Anyway,
this is tuned for me to be bad at it.
We had CJ initially didn't name it that. He initially named it events, and it was still being blocked because if you look at your dev tools when you're using something, it will say blocked by whatever, and you can open up the dev tools and see which requests are being blocked. So you often have to rename them to something that is not that at all, and it's a cat and mouse game because as soon as you rename it, and if you're a large website, they're just going to add that route to to the block list as well. So it's kind of, for the Syntax website, we're not that big that someone's going to add it on to our website, but we have a proxy there that will sort of send the request along. You do have to pay a little bit more because now you're proxying every single request that goes along, but it is a way to get around it. And it does take a little bit of work to get set up, but you can look at our proxies that we've written there.
Yeah, it's annoying, but worth it if you need analytics, that's for sure. Or at least it's more annoying than just dropping a script in.
I don't run this on the rest of my websites that I have Sentry on, and I must just probably through enough traffic that it's not ever been an issue. There only was one time it was an issue, and that was because there was an iOS content blocker that was blocking one of our scripts. What was it called? It was called sharebox.svelte, and it was it was blocking the loading of that thing, and that was breaking the whole website. So it was called sharebutton.js, and sharebutton.js was on the list because of some third-party integrations that implement share buttons, right? Like they don't want I don't know, Dig or something. I don't know who makes share buttons anymore, but it's on the block list. So I had to rename that component to hairbutton.js. If you go into the Syntax repo and you search for hair button, you'll see that I had to rename it so that it stopped getting blocked by content blockers. And the downside to that was the content blocker was blocking that, but I couldn't figure out why it was being blocked because the content blocker was also blocking our Sentry. So there was nothing showing up in our Sentry in that case. But other than that, I've never had something where it didn't eventually show up because even our audience, which is extremely, extremely content blocker heavy, web developers that are security minded, we still think only about half of people are using ad blockers.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we should say, feel free to turn that ad blocker off if you want. I don't know. It doesn't matter. We tunnel events anyways. On our site, we don't have any ads anyways, and we don't have any tracking cookies. So, yeah. All right. Next question from Shivan. What are your thoughts on using websites being able to work without JavaScript? For example, if you have a form, can we implement progressive enhancement where the form works without JS and maybe the user experience wouldn't be the best? I would really like the idea of making the web accessible to everyone, but the lack of JS limits what you can build. Thank you for your answer in advance. Yeah, so, here's how I feel about it. Most people have JavaScript turned on. I would say, just about everyone in 2024 has JavaScript turned on. Not that everybody does, but just about, right? Because the web just flat out would be an awful experience for you if you didn't.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to still progressively enhance, because here's the thing. A lot of sites, they load the HTML first, then they hydrate their JavaScript framework. And in between that time, users can still use the website. And if you click on that form and the JavaScript hasn't completely loaded, maybe you're loading way too much JavaScript and that JavaScript hasn't loaded, then that action will fail if you haven't progressively enhanced this. So this is one of the reasons why I really like what SvelteKit does here. You write every single time you're hitting the database or the backend to do anything. You're writing a form. You're writing a form with an action that goes to a real URL. And then on top of that, you're just throwing a little sprinkle of use enhance to progressively enhance and do this form with JavaScript. So that way, every form you write ends up being HTML first. And that way it works without JavaScript. And this is sincerely the way I think you should be working. You should write your forms so that they do work without JavaScript. However, they should work better with JavaScript so you can sprinkle on that progressive enhancement if that JavaScript has loaded. So yes, Shivan, I think you're right. I don't think you should necessarily worry about the user not having JavaScript for everything, but I do think you should be writing your apps in a way that the JavaScript is adding a progressive enhancement to the experience.
I agree as well. This is one thing I'm really excited about with server components, because React folks are finally going to join the rest of the frameworks where build your forms with web standards, meaning that you can submit them without JavaScript on the page. And that's just good practice, because if you build them with web standards, they are very easy to work with. And then obviously you can progressively enhance them with JavaScript once the JavaScript loads. But people for years have been saying, Brian LaRue is huge on this as well. It was like, you should be able to turn off your JavaScript. And we had him on the show as well. And the whole website should still just work. I love that idea, but really, who's really running a website without JavaScript? Try turn off JavaScript on your browser and surf the web for 20 minutes. It's not going to work, you know? Like, I understand the whole idealistic concept behind it, and I realize we're probably loading a lot of JavaScript on the client, but really, no one's doing that.
Yeah, I agree.
And people are probably going to get mad at me for that, but I don't buy it.
I think it's entirely right. I think the people who are living in that universe where they say, oh, your whole website needs to work without JavaScript, and because people out there aren't using JavaScript. I don't think those people exist, because how many websites, turn it off and browse the internet. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, your website should. I think the other thing is, like, if JavaScript is off and you get a blank page, you have failed.
Yes, totally.
The content should load, and your styles should load without any JavaScript, right? But in order to use the application, that I think you have to have JavaScript on it. You don't have to, but obviously you can use HTMX with a little bit of JavaScript sprinkled on and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you do need it turned on. Man, we got some good questions. These are really good. Next question from Said Yeater. Hey there, I'm a fan of your content. Thanks a lot. You're welcome. I've been doing freelance jobs using Next.js and React Native for a couple years. I've been hearing Webpack, TurboPack, Babel, Metro, PostCSS, and more tools, but I haven't touched them beyond some configs. So my question is, what are they for? And should I know and learn them deeper for a better developer? This question makes me so happy, because this guy's been a developer for a couple years and doesn't know what these things are, which is not a slight, which makes me so happy that we are in a spot where developer tooling is good enough that you don't have to know what these lower level things are. So Said, I'll tell you, you probably are using Webpack, TurboPack, Babel, Metro, and PostCSS already. You just don't know it. And that's because the higher level tools are taking care of it all for you. And should you learn them? I don't think you should learn them unless you really need to start poking around and at how to use them. These things are very complex to use. And if somebody can take all of that and tuck it under a nice NPM script for you and it just works, that's what we've been chasing that for years. So I'm really happy to hear this.
Yeah, it is funny when you look back at it, Wes, the amount of complexity that we've lost over the years. People act like things have gotten more intense. But I was just talking to Randy, our producer, just yesterday about how we used to deploy websites versus how we deploy websites now. He's like, oh, I just make a change to this and I do a git commit, and then all of a sudden it's live on the website. I don't understand how it works, but it just works. And I said, exactly, man. Here, let me tell you how we used to do this. And then it just made me think, man, things have gotten a lot easier once they're set up and once you have gotten it, landed. Last question here from Henry. Hey, Wes and Scott, love the show. Of course. Thank you, Henry. I've heard you both, as well as other podcast hosts, mention attending local JS developer groups. How do you go about finding a group and or other events? What advice do you have for attending and meeting people? Thank you. So meetup.com is really, unfortunately, still the place for this. I don't know why no one's made a better meetup.com yet. But this is still where everything's posted, as far as I know, especially the ones local. You can even check Twitter. But a way that you could look for it is your largest region near you. So look for any major city near you, then do JavaScript meetup on Google. Seriously, things will come up. In Michigan, it was the Southeast Michigan JavaScript meetup. In Denver, it's the Denver Script meetup. Both of those are on Meetup, I think. But Google, Twitter, Meetup, and once you're there, you just have to show up. You don't have to say anything to anybody. You just show up. Maybe the second time you're there, maybe you want to talk to people. Maybe there's a room in this thing to meet and talk to people. I went with a buddy of mine to my very first JavaScript meetup. They were talking about Sass and Haml. It was my very first time, and everybody was JavaScript developers there, or PHP developers. And they're talking about Sass and Haml. We're all like, whoa, this is crazy stuff. And I went with a friend. And it helped that I went with a friend because I didn't have to worry about how I felt socially. I could just be there and explore the topics and then discuss the topics and then talk about it later. And then maybe eventually you meet some other people.
And if you are someone like me where you're extroverted, be the person that sort of stirs up the conversation as well. Because often when you go to a conference or a meetup, there's a lot of people that are so stoked to be there, but they're just so nervous to talk to anybody and they don't want to interrupt. So I will often, especially in an elevator, it's awkward for me, but because I'm somewhat extroverted and because usually at least somebody knows who I am, not to be like pompous, but often it'll get the conversation going. And then I'll just be like, hey, did you meet this person? And then later in the conference, you'll see those two people hanging out together because they get to know each other. So it's your duty as an extrovert to hopefully not making people too anxious, but try to stir it up and whatnot. Other tips for finding local developer meetups is find developers in your area and just send them a DM on Twitter. The amount of people that send me DMs, hey, I'm moving to Canada, I'm moving to Toronto, I'm moving to Hamilton. Where do we meet up? What's going on in this thing? Once you're in, it's good. If there's not, start something, find a couple devs and just go for a coffee, go for a beer. You don't have to make a huge meetup. Some of the best meetups we've had, and this is how we've done the Syntax meetup, is literally just, hey, we're going to a bar to talk about tech.
Let's chill.
And a bunch of people will show up. As also people that don't even know who you are will show up. At the Syntax meetup, we had people come up to us and they go, what's Syntax? And
what's the deal here? Yeah, what's going on? Yeah.
What's going on? And I was like, we're a podcast about JavaScript. Oh, cool. I'll check it out. And they're just there to crank the free beers because they went on Meetup. And then I've heard from many people where there's people that will go to meetups every single night, grab a couple slices of pizza, slam a beer, and then peel.
That's great. Yeah.
So if those people can do it, you can do it.
Wes, I really appreciate the extroverts like you out there. In fact, going to conferences with Wes is great because Wes will just take you around and he'll just talk to anybody. And I'm not that kind of person. It's gotten a little bit easier for me the more practice I get at it. But I will say, if you see somebody like Wes or I that you recognize from Twitter or from podcasts or anything, we love it when you come up and talk to us about stuff. I personally do. It's really great. And in fact, I've met a ton of really awesome developers, especially at that JS Nation I was at just recently. A lot of people felt very, cool to come up and say hi and chat with me. And every single person I talked to was awesome and interesting. And,
so many interesting people. That's also what I love so much about this is that somebody will be really quiet in the corner and you'll be like, hey, what's up? I'm Wes. What do you do? And they're like, oh, I launched rockets with JavaScript. And it's holy smokes. You're really cool. I want to hear more about this. You learn so much. And I find going to these meetups extremely energizing. I don't go to as many as I can now that I have a million kids, but I always leave them. I always go to them telling my wife, being like, I don't want to go to this thing anymore. Like I just want to stay home. And then I come home at like 11:30 and I'm like, woo, that was so fun. I met so many cool people.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's great, and I always have a great time meeting everybody. And one of the cool things I know, to Ted, you said people are so cool. What I find is people are working on the coolest projects.
Yes.
People work for like the most wild stuff, and it's always just fantastic. So yeah, come up and talk to us. It's a lot of fun.
All right, let's get into some sick picks. I'm going to sick pick something for your car. It's called Waterless Wash. And I just got a new car. I'm really excited about it. And I like to at least keep it looking nice for a little bit before it starts to get totally destroyed by kids and door dings and whatever. And I discovered this stuff called Waterless Wash, which is you just take a spray thing, you spray it on. Obviously, it's not when it's totally dirty, but like when it's kind of dirty from sunscreen fingerprints or dust from the road, you just spray it on, wipe it around, and then take another microfiber and then just kind of buff it out. And it makes your car look so good. And it's beautiful because you don't always have the time to do a full wash and dry of the car to make it look awesome. But I found that this is a sort of a great in between. And a lot of like car show guys will use this. A lot of detailers will use this in between doing a major car wash. So there's all kinds out there. I just went for the Rain-X waterless wash, which like the like detailing car wash community is one of those communities that's kind of insufferable.
Really?
Because, oh yeah. Yeah, because they're like, oh, just the best waterless wash is this $80 tiny little 200 milliliter thing that I made myself. And like, here's how to wash your car. I have the 7 bucket system. Don't buy the Costco rags. Those are garbage, you know? And it's just like, never go through the self-washing car washes where you like use the scrubber things yourself, because those are full of contaminants. And it's like regular people just want to wash their car and have it look okay. Like this is not a show car. I don't care that much, but I want it to be a little bit shiny. Anyways, that's my rant about car guys. Will probably turn their nose at me using like something you can buy at the store, but Rain-X waterless wash has been awesome for me.
Also, Rain-X as the spray for your windows is sick. The way the water repels. So that car wash also includes the water repellent in it. So I'm gonna get me some of that. My car cannot go through a car wash because of it has a matte paint coat finish, and the car wash will like polish the paint coat apparently. So I have to hand wash it all the time. And when it's not actually dirty and just slightly dirty, I'm like, it just never gets washed. So I'm going to take you up and get some of this just for those times. My car would definitely need that.
The matte looks so good though.
It looks so good. Yes.
I very much considered learning how to wrap a car just to make mine matte. And I bought a bunch of the PPF, the paint protection film. And I put it on like the high traffic areas, like where the kids step and where the kids grab and those areas that get dinged up and scratched. But that is not easy. And it's coming from someone who learned how to tin his own windows and whatnot. And like, I feel like I'm pretty good at this, but those guys who wrap cars, that is a hard job.
Yeah. I don't, that's not something I'll ever do. I should have wrapped my car when I first got it though. Because man, daycare. When you park at daycare, those parents and kids, they do not care. There's so many little scratches on the side of my car.
Oh yeah.
It sucks. Yeah, I should have done it right away.
So many people are like, "Are you getting PPF? Are you wrapping your car?" And I looked into it. It's like $6,000.
Yeah,
there's
I know.
No chance I'm spending $6,000 to put a plastic wrap on my car. I was telling my wife, I was like, the most peace you can have in the world is being okay with your stuff being a little bit roughed up.
I know. That was actually the best part about my last car being 10 years old, is that it's like, it's 10 years old. Okay.
Yeah, it will come. It will suck. But as long as you're okay with it, it's good peace.
All right, I'm going to sick pick an app that I've been using and love. It is tweak.so, tweek.so. I like to-do apps. I think to-do apps are great. I've used many to-do apps. Things, Todoist, Height, all those things. The problem is that every single to-do app is like not comfortable with their main function, every single one of these to-do apps is like, oh, we have to add Kanban and planning and teams. And it's like, I don't need a stinking project management app. I need a to-do app for myself. And to the point where like I was using pen and paper. Pen and paper's great, but it doesn't have things like notifications, and it's hard to move things around and stuff like that. So I started using this Tweak, which is actually based off of pen and paper style to-do systems. And that's what makes it so good. The interface is minimal in all the best possible ways. It does subtasks. It does scheduling. It does like week at a glance. It allows you to it doesn't even allow you to tag your to-dos. It just allows you to put a color on them, which is essentially a tag. And you just drag them in, and it feels really nice and native. It's a local first app. You can download your data at any time. Even the free version is great. The native mobile app or the mobile app is really great. So, as somebody who doesn't want a complex to-do app, who just I got ADHD, I'll spend more time on the system than I will completing my to-dos if the app is too complex. So, Tweak. It's simplistic. It's perfect. It's the app of my dreams, and I wish I built it. So, shout out to the Tweak team.
Is it free? Is it paid?
There is a paid product, which is cheaper than Todoist, but that paid product only gets you a handful of things that you could live without. So the paid product gives you like Google Calendar syncing. It gives you reoccurring tasks. It gives you subtasks, and then like additional colors, I think.
Okay. And is it like monthly or at one time?
I did an annual, but I think you can do monthly.
Yeah.
Let me check.
Sweet. Yeah,
I did the
that's
annual.
The thing. I was like, I've been on things for like 15 years, and it's just the right amount of like complexity for me. And they're not trying to add teams into it. That's every product is like, oh, we need to make money. How do you make money? Teams.
Yeah.
You know,
let's
you look
put our
at
entire
Warp,
resources on
Raycast, teams. Everybody wants teams. That's how you make money.
Yes. I want me a to-do app. I don't care. I want simple. Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Tweak.so. I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Shameless plugs. Check out the updates to the latest syntax.fm. Scott worked really hard on building re-implementing the audio player and putting all those features in. So check it on out.
So I'm also going to shamelessly plug the shop, the swag store. Syntax.fm/shop is the perfect place to find all of the syntax gear. We have skateboards. We have like the coolest basketball in the whole world. And we have a whole bunch of new t-shirts that are up right now. In fact, t-shirts that are going to support open source projects as well. So if you want to check out all the new stuff, it's crazy, including this shirt that I'm wearing right now that says Sick Pick. It's my favorite shirt. I'm wearing it all the time. Head on over to syntax.fm/shop.
Show us the back. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that one came out really good. I'm really happy about that.
It's fantastic.
They all came out really
Color's
good,
great.
but pretty. And I don't even know if we mentioned this, but you can buy a syntax can koozie, double walled stainless can koozie, $7. So just throw that on your order.
Throw that on your order, yeah. And we'll have new stuff all the time too. So check it out.
All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We will catch you later.
Peace.
Peace.